Masechet Beisah Daf Bet. We begin new Masechet. The name of it is, as usual, is called after the first word. However, Masechet Beisah has another name that you'll find in manuscripts and made reference to in Rishonim, which is Masechet Yom Tov, which is more appropriate for the content. So Masechet Beisah, this is the Masechet that's all about the laws of Yom Tov, not Chol HaMoed. That's a different Masechet. That's Moed Katan. We have 5 chapters. Chapter 1, we're going to be dealing with the laws of Mukseh, followed by Eruv Tavshilin. Even though we had whole Masechet Eruvin, if you remember, it dealt almost nothing in Masechet Eruvin about Eruv Tavshilin when you want to prepare from the holiday to Shabbat. And then we'll be talking about catching and hunting. So the main difference between Yom Tov and Shabbat, 2 main differences, is you're allowed to prepare food and you can carry. Carrying might be related to preparing food. You can carry your dishes and go to your friend's house, go to your in-laws. And once you can carry for that, you can carry for other things. And the other difference is cooking, preparing food. Now, that doesn't mean you can do anything. So, for example, and this will be relevant to today, although regarding preparing meat, you could do from the beginning to the end. You can go and slaughter the animal and do everything from then on. Although, how about catching and hunting? Well, that'll be the subject of chapter 3, whether you're allowed to. So maybe not all the way from the beginning, but certainly from the point of shechita. However, when it comes to fruits and vegetables, one is not allowed to pluck fruits and vegetables on Yom Tov, because you could have done that before. And I don't know, I think an apple or a carrot that you plucked yesterday probably tastes about the same as today. So that's the fundamental principle, that you can do anything on Yom Tov that you couldn't have done before. But if you could have done before just as well, then you have to do it before. Regarding meat, I mean, a day-old meat before refrigerators is not going to be clearly as good as meat for that very day. My brother-in-law is a fisherman, and he brings, fish straight from the ocean to the table, and you can tell the difference between that and what you buy in a store. So that's chapter 3. Chapter 4 is about preparing fire, and chapter 5 is other comparisons between Yom Tov and Shabbat. So these last 3 are mostly about preparing food, but today we will deal with the topic of Mukseh, which is about the same as on Shabbat as Yom Tov, although there may be some differences, which our Mishnah, the Gemara today will bring up. All right, so we jump right in. Beisah shen nolada b'Yom Tov. Beth Shammai omerim te'achel, or Beth Hillel omerim lo te'achel. We're going to have a series of 3 machalokot in this Mishnah of controversies between the houses. And what's distinctive about these 3, besides the fact that they relate to Yom Tov, is that they also, all 3, Beth Shammai unusually is more lenient. Okay, so the first is that an egg that's laid on Yom Tov, it's born on Yom Tov. So we have a new thing here. So Beth Shammai says, go ahead, eat it. Why not? Beth Hillel says, no, you cannot eat it. The Gemara today will give 4 reasons for Beth Shammai's opinion. That's going to be the main thing we're going to focus on. Okay, so we'll come back to this case. Next case, Beth Shammai omedim seor bekazait vechames bekakotevet. This is on Pesach, when there's a prohibition regarding seor, that's sourdough, starter dough. So that is more stringent, because you use that to make other things chametz. So that is the smallest amount is just an olive size. If someone has that, then they are chayav. Whereas chametz, just the bread itself, which is not starter, doesn't cause anything else, but his bread itself is a little bit more lenient, and that's a kotevet. Which is some kotevet, dry date is somewhere between an olive size and an egg size. That's Beth Shammai, who's more lenient on chametz. Beth Hillel omerim zeh vazeh bekezayit. Beth Hillel is more stringent, and he says both seor and chametz, the size to be liable is the small size of an olive, so that is more stringent. And the third case, hashochet chayav ha'of beyom tov. Beth Shammai omerim yachpor bedeked vichaseh, uBeth Hillel omrim lo yishchot ela im ken haya lo afar muchan mebe'od yom. So someone that does shechita on Yom Tov, which is permitted, and if it happens to be a deer or a bird. So regarding those types of animals, here's the pasuk: anyone from Bnei Israel, asher yasud sayid o chaya o of, asher yachel v'shafach et damo v'chisahu be'afar. So specifically regarding chaya, wild animals, and birds, if one does shechita anytime, a weekday, then you have to cover the blood. So this does not apply, according to rabbinic halacha, does not apply to cows and sheep because they're not included in this pasuk. Although in the temple scroll, they're bothered by this. Why should it apply to these animals and not those? So they harmonize and say, yes, even to all animals. But the rabbis do not agree with that. Okay, the point now here is if you happen to do this on Yom Tov, you kill an animal or a deer or a bird, that's permitted, but now you have to cover the blood. So, and that will involve digging a hole and moving dirt, which is Mukseh. So Beth Shammai says, it's no problem. You can dig a hole, get the dirt, and put it on the blood, and that's perfectly permitted. Beth Hillel says, no, don't even start the process. Don't do shechita unless you have dirt ready from beforehand. Dirt is not automatically Mukseh. Generally Mukseh because it has basically no use. This type of Mukseh is found even in the Dead Sea Scrolls. They say, don't just touch and move dirt, right, for no reason. However, if you set aside some dirt and say, this is useful for me, I'm going to use it tomorrow, Yom Tov, because I'm planning on making some venison, and so I'm going to use this to cover the blood, then that's fine. As long as you have that ready, then you can do shechita and cover it. But if you don't have and you didn't think of it before, then don't even do shechita, because how are you going to cover the blood without violating this problem of mukseh? Umodim shim shachat she'achor badeket v'chaseh. Now b'di avad, I did shechita. After I do shechita, the blood's on the floor. I'm like, oh, I have to cover the blood. I forgot to get a dirt ready. So in that case, you should cover it. It's more important to cover the dirt. That's a biblical verse right there, even though that will violate the more minor problem of mukseh and, even possibly making a hole. But the hole, you don't care about the hole, you just want to get the dirt. So that's not as bad as missing out on covering the dirt. Okay, and last line, which seems like a non sequitur, she efed kira muchan hu. If you put a vav here, it would make more sense. They agree that ashes from a stove are considered prepared. So even though this is left over in the stove from making a fire, but it's in my house, it's in my stove, and so people automatically have in mind that the ashes are useful for something. So even if I didn't have in mind in particular that I'm going to use it, even Beth Hillel would agree that best thing to do is get dirt ready from before. Second best is you could use the ashes in the oven. Third best, don't do shechita at all. If you did it, b'di'avad, then you can. So the Gemara will discuss that last add-on to the Mishnah in a later date. That's the Mishnah. Now we go back to the beginning. Ubemai askinan, regarding the egg that was born on Yom Tov. What kind of case is it? And based on that, we can know what is the problem for Beth Hillel. In general, there's two kinds of chickens, those that you're planning to eat and those that you're planning to use to lay eggs. Even till today, modern farmers, right, they'll split them into these two. So if it's a chicken that you're fattening up and you're going to plan to eat it as a meal, well, that kind of chicken is not mukseh on Yom Tov, because you can go do shechita and eat it. And therefore, if there happened to be an egg inside, and that egg, it was laid on Yom Tov, so then what's the problem? It's just part of the animal. Uchla di'ifrat hu. It's simply food that's separated. So if you have a chicken, you're allowed to eat any part of the chicken, its wings, its legs, its dark meat, the white meat, and including the egg that's inside. There used to be a restaurant in Jerusalem. They would serve you any part of the chicken, the heart, the liver. You could order anything. And so therefore, since the chicken is not mukseh, the egg that's part of it is not mukseh. So just because it happened to get laid on Yom Tov shouldn't be any problem. And then we understand Beth Shammai why it's permitted, but we don't understand Beth Hillel why it would be prohibited. So let's try the other case. It must be that it's an egg that's made for laying eggs. And that's why that kind of chicken is mukseh, because I'm not planning on eating it for Yom Tov, because you don't eat the factory that's making you eggs. And therefore, I set it aside as mukseh, and therefore the egg that's in it is also going to be mukseh. In that case, we understand Beth Hillel. That's why it's prohibited. But we have the other problem. My tamayu de Beth Shammai Muksehi. Then why should Beth Shammai say it's permitted? After all, I set aside this chicken for laying eggs. I'm not going to use it. And the egg also that is produced from it should be prohibited. In general, anything that's mukseh at the beginning of the holiday is going to be mukseh throughout the holiday. Okay, good. So that is our quandary, for which we're going to give a number of answers. The following is a bracket in parentheses. That's why I put it in green. You see, this whole discussion is basically stam, and generally the opening sugya of every masechet is from the anonymous editors. It's kind of an intro, but this is a question on a question of the stam. So this seems to be a secondary layer of editing of the editors. So they ask on this question, Umay kushya dilma bet Shammai let lehu mukseh. Wait, I mean, why is this such a problem? Why is Bet Shammai lenient? Maybe he doesn't hold of the principle of Mukseh at all. In general, if you remember from Shabbat, there's a machloket between two Tanaim. Rabbi Shimon minimizes Mukseh. Rabbi Yehudah has a more maximal interpretation of it. Even Rabbi Shimon, we generally say he doesn't have Mukseh, but he has some aspects of Mukseh. He limits it a lot. Beth Hillel, Rabbi Yehudah has more. Now, Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yehudah, they are students of Rabbi Akiva, so they're later than Hillel and Shammai, they're later than the houses. But nevertheless, we know that there is an opinion among the Tanaim, and so maybe Bet Shammai would be the original subscriber to that opinion that there's no Mukseh. So then there would be no problem. He doesn't have Mukseh at all. That's why there's no problem of the chicken that's meant to lay eggs, and there's no problem of the egg that's born from it. So why, we're just wondering, to the earlier editor, why are you wondering about this so much? So we answer, no, we say even the person who would say Mukseh is permitted, if it comes to something, a new thing that is born on Yom Tov, that everyone would agree is a problem. Why? Because the idea is Mukseh, there are some things that I set aside that I'm for sure not going to use, like my phone. I turn off my phone before Yom Tov, and I know I'm not going to use it. So that's mukseh. There's other things that for sure I'm going to use, like the bread I'm going to eat. So then I know. Most things in the world, they're there in the closet, and I don't know if I'm going to use it. I just didn't think about it at all. So the one who says, I don't have mukseh, they say, we want maximum usage. Why should I limit myself to anything? I'm going to assume in my mind, anything that I own, anything that exists, I should be able to use, even if it's unlikely that I'm going to use even that can of beans in the back of the closet. Who knows? Maybe I'll find it and want to use it. Therefore, we should assume nothing is mukseh. That's fine. You can have a presumption of usage about anything that exists, but something that doesn't even exist at the beginning of Shabbat or beginning of Yom Tov, there's no way I can have even a presumed assumption that I want to use it. And therefore, even the person that says Mukseh is permitted, if it's a new thing that's created on Yom Tov itself, like this egg that is born and is now a new entity, so then for sure, even Bet Shammai would have to say it's prohibited. Okay, and so that explains why we can't just get out of the problem by saying Bet Shammai doesn't have any concept of Mukseh. This is nolad. Okay, and now we get back to the original programming. My tamayu de Bet Shammai. This is a nice example of resumptive repetition. That's just fancy words to say that you find this in Tanakh and in other places also. When you have a line and then you interrupt it with a tangent, and you want to come back to the main point, you repeat the line that you stopped at. So you see here we say my tamayu de Bet Shammai. Muksehi, then we go on a tangent, and when we come back, we repeat the question, my tamayu de Bet Shammai. Okay, hope you appreciated that. And now we're going to have answer number one. Let me just show you the outline so you can see what's upcoming. The first answer of Rav Nahman is that it's a problem of Mukseh, and it is in fact a chicken that is for laying eggs, and then he'll have to explain exactly kind of as we thought, Bet Shammai and Beth Hillel are arguing along the lines of Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yehudah, whether there is no Mukseh, not even in nolad, or Mukseh and even in nolad, right? Although we just said there should be a difference between Mukseh and nolad, maybe not, maybe even nolad, there's no Mukseh in that case. And so he's going to explain the machloket along those lines. And in the meantime, he's going to bring in a few other cases of Mukseh in order to sort out all these opinions. The last three are going to assume that it's a chicken that's for eating, in fact, which is not mukseh. So then we're going to have to explain Beth Hillel, if it's chicken for eating, what's the problem? And so they're all going to say it's more of a derabanan. Rabbah is going to say it's about preparing. Actually, might be a doraita, but it's a rare case. Preparing Shabbat Yom Tov. Rav Yosef and Rabbi Yishak will say it's a gezerah, that it's kind of similar to fallen fruit. Just like a fruit that falls from a tree is not allowed, so to an egg that falls from the chicken is not allowed. And if I permit the egg, then I might come to think that the apple that falls is also allowed. Rav Yishak has a similar thing regarding liquids that seep out of a fruit. Okay, we'll get into all that in more detail. So let's see it inside. Amar Rav Nahman le'olam betarnegolat ha'omedet legadel besim. As we first mentioned, it's talking about a chicken that is for laying eggs, and therefore it is in fact mukseh. U'de'it le'mukseh, it le'nolad. And if you think there is mukseh, you also think there is nolad, and that would be Beth Hillel. U'delet le'mukseh, let le'nolad. And the person, whoever thinks there's no mukseh, thinks there's no nolad at all. I know I made that distinction between things that exist and don't exist, but maybe not. Maybe the whole concept of mukseh, it does not, he thinks does not apply. So Beth Shammai Rabbi Shimon, Beth Hillel Rabbi Yehudah. Beth Shammai follows Rabbi Shimon, or really the other way around chronologically. They both think that there's no mukseh. So even though it's a chicken that is made as an egg factory and is not usable, doesn't matter. No mukseh for the chicken, no mukseh for the egg either, not even nolad. And Beth Hillel follows Rabbi Yehudah, or the other way around, and they both think that there is mukseh. So it's a very fundamental machloket here about mukseh. All right, let's test this out. Umi amar Rav Nahman hachi v'hatenan Bet Shammai omerim magbihin me'al ha'shulchan atzamot uklipin uBet Hillel omerim mesaleket hatabla kula umena'ara. We have a Mishnah in Masechet Shabbat 21:3 regarding bones, and it says that when you get the food you can move and eat because it's food. But when you're done with it, what do you do with the bones of the animal or the shells from nuts that you ate? Now they're no longer food; they no longer have any use. So Bet Shammai says you can pick them up, right, and throw them out. And Bet Hillel says no, you cannot move them directly. Rather, you have to take the whole tray and indirectly shake them out. And that's the Mishnah. Now that Mishnah actually fits perfectly well with everything we just said. Bet Shammai is more lenient and says no problem of Mukseh. Bet Hillel is stricter. Yes, there is a problem of Mukseh. So this is not the question yet. The question is as follows: V'amar Rav Nahman, anu en lanu ela Bet Shammai Rabbi Yehudah or Bet Hillel Rabbi Shimon. Regarding that Mishnah, Rav Nahman said you should switch the opinions, and he thinks Bet Shammai, according to what I learned from my tradition, Bet Shammai is the same as Rabbi Yehudah, and they have Mukseh. So really, Bet Shammai would be the one that's to say you have to lift up the whole tray and shake them out indirectly. And Bet Hillel is like Rabbi Shimon, and they would say there's no Mukseh, and you can just pick up the bones and throw them out directly. And so now, even though the original Mishnah works perfectly fine, happens to be Rav Nahman said this answer, and Rav Nahman is the one that switched around the opinions, and now we have a contradiction between two Mishnayot according to Rav Nahman. In ours, Bet Hillel follows Rabbi Yehudah and says there is Mukseh, and the one in Shabbat, ours is regarding Yom Tov, and the one in Shabbat, Bet Hillel follows Rabbi Shimon and says there's no problem. So we're going to have to resolve this question for Rav Nahman's sake. Amalach Rav Nahman, Kabe Shabbat, Desatam lan Tana Rabbi Shimon. Ditnan mechatechina tedeloin lifnei behema vetanei be'ela lifnei kilabim mokim la lebet Hillel ke Rabbi Shimon. Basically, we're going to answer and say there's a difference between Shabbat and Yom Tov, and on Shabbat we're going to be actually more lenient. Bet Hillel will be more lenient. How do we know what we should do this? Because Satam lan Tana, the reciter of the Mishnayot, and in this case referring to the Yehudah Nasi, who redacted and composed the Mishnayot, when he gives a satam, when he has an anonymous opinion in the Mishnah means that halacha should follow that one. So regarding Shabbat, and the anonymous opinion in the Mishnah follows Rabbi Shimon, who says there's no mukseh. What's the case? That you're allowed to take pumpkins and cut them to feed to an animal, or a nevela. An animal died on Yom Tov, and obviously it's not kosher, even though it died on Yom Tov, and therefore would be mukzeh. No, it doesn't matter. You're allowed to cut it into pieces and feed it to your dog. So you see, according to this, that there is no problem of mukzeh on Shabbat, and this is anonymous and it's lenient, like Rabbi Shimon. So since we see that the Yehudah Nasi followed Rabbi Shimon for Shabbat, therefore, in the Mishnah regarding the bones, which is also about Shabbat, he said he made Beth Hillel follow Rabbi Shimon. And so that's why Beth Hillel follows Rabbi Shimon in that case. Aval, Gabe Yom Tov, the Satam Lan Tanak Rabbi Yehudah, in a case regarding Yom Tov, we have another anonymous Mishnah where the opinion follows Rabbi Yehudah. Titnan, and here's the last case in this regard. En mebaki'ain asim min hakorot velo min hakora shenishtabera b'yom tov. Mokim la lebet Hillel ki Rabbi Yehudah. There's a Mishnah later on in Masechet Beisah that says you're not allowed to take wood beams or wood from a beam in your house that broke on Yom Tov and chop it into pieces and use it as firewood, right? You want to make a fire and like you ran out of firewood, so you go to your construction in the back, you're building a deck and you take the beams, or if a beam in your house fell and you're like, it's not usable anymore, now I'm going to decide to use it for the fire, you can't, because those beams were set aside for building or to be in your house. You didn't have in mind that you're going to use them for burning, and therefore you can't go and chop them up on Yom Tov. So what we see from here is that there is a problem of Mukseh on Yom Tov, according to the anonymous opinion. And so therefore, we want to make sure that the anonymous opinion, which is the halacha l'maaseh, also is in conjunction with Beth Hillel, because halacha also follows Beth Hillel. So mokim la Beth Hillel ke Rabbi Yehudah. So regarding Yom Tov, he makes sure that Beth Hillel will follow Rabbi Yehudah. So I know that was a lot. Let me summarize in the chart here. Here's the basic problem. We have our Mishnah, which is regarding Yom Tov, and here Beth Hillel is stringent, like Rabbi Yehudah. There's a Mishnah in Shabbat regarding bones, where according to Rav Nahman's tradition anyway, Beth Hillel is lenient, following Rabbi Shimon, and there's no mukzeh. And so our answer is that, there's a difference between Shabbat and Yom Tov. Paradoxically, Shabbat is actually more lenient. The Gemara will explain why in a second. And Yom Tov is more stringent. That's the difference. And we prove it because, after all, there's Mishnah in Shabbat, which is anonymous, regarding giving animals food, and that says it's permitted, so that's Rabbi Shimon. And we have another Mishnah in Beisah, which is regarding Yom Tov, and that's the beams, and that's stringent, like Rabbi Yehudah. So once you have this, there's no more contradiction. Beth Hillel, Rabbi Yehudah Nasi, and is creating this whole structure in the Mishnah, and he tells us the message through anonymous opinions, one here and one there, and he says the same message regarding Beth Hillel. See, Beth Hillel is stringent regarding Yom Tov and lenient regarding Shabbat. Good. Question?
No, it's okay.
Okay. Good. So, good. Now we'll ask the next question. Michdi, man setameh lematnitin, Rabbi. So far you're talking about these anonymous Mishnayot. Who's the one that arranged the Mishnayot? Right? Who completed them? It was Rabbi Yehudah Nasi. Ma'ishana b'Shabbat desatam lan keRabbi Shimon, or ma'ishana b'Yom Tov desatam lan keRabbi Yehudah. It's not just the reciter, right? This is Rabbi Yehudah Nasi. We can ask, why would he make the anonymous opinion regarding Shabbat more lenient, like Rabbi Shimon, and on Yom Tov more stringent? Usually you think that Shabbat would be more stringent than Yom Tov. It is in terms of the punishment of Sekilah. The answer is Amrei Shabbat echamira vela'atel zilzulebe satam lan keRabbi Shimon demekel Yom Tov dekil va'atel zilzulebe satam lan keRabbi Yehudah demachmir. Okay, so paradoxically, because Shabbat is so stringent, a violation of Shabbat, you get sekilah. So then people are going to be automatically careful, and so you don't have to add extra safeguards. And Mukseh is in part a safeguard. Don't touch the hammer, don't move the hammer, because then you're going to start building. But you don't have to, because Shabbat is so machmir on its own, we don't have to add the stringency of Mukseh. Yom Tov, however, is more lenient. The punishment is more lenient. You're allowed to cook, you're allowed to carry. And so once a person is already cooking, they're going to start doing other things, and they're going to end up being light with their and violating Yom Tov. Therefore, we have to be more machmir and add stringencies of Mukseh to Yom Tov to make sure that people are doing it. That's kind of like, I don't have to warn my students to prepare for the final because they know, the final is very important, right? But when it comes to just a small homework assignment, they're going to probably not do it. So that one, I have to give a whole speech how important it is to do the homework assignment, right? And make sure to add safeguards to it. So that's the idea, and that explains it. Okay, this line of Satam Lan, ke this or that the Yehudah Nasi. So this is a really important methodological point, and I want to read to you one Rashi here on this very line. That you have to remember this anytime we learn Mishnayot or Gemara. This is essential. So Rashi says, Man Satam Lan L'matnitin Rabbi. Who's the one that composed the Mishnah? After all, is Rabbi. Who's Sidera Mishnah? He's the one that ordered the whole Mishnah. When he saw the opinion of a certain sage and he agreed with it and said, yes, this is correct, this should be the halacha, Shena'an Stam, he took off that sage's name and he taught it anonymously. Shem Omra, and he didn't mention its author, Alehen. So that it wouldn't be repeated in the name of a single minority opinion. Rather, it should look as if it was said by the majority, and then people will do it. So this is really mind-blowing. First of all, you're not citing something in someone's name, right? We know how important it is to attribute something to someone's name. But in this case, it's not because we want to dishonor that sage that said it, but rather the opposite, because it's what he said is so good that he wants it to be everyone's opinion. So therefore, he takes off the name so that it doesn't look like it was only one single opinion, but rather it looks like it was a majority. So when we say that the stam represents the majority, it's not that they were actually sitting around in a circle and everybody voted and that became the majority. Rather, it's an attributed majority that Rabbi Yehudah Nasi used. It's a literary device to explain and convince the listeners, the learners of Mishnah that's an indication that this is the halacha l'maaseh. Okay, so this is extremely important, and that's why he would take off those names. And it seems in this case, see, we really don't have access just from these sources what Beth Hillel really said, right? The Beth Hillel, was he consistent? Like in our version of the Mishnah, he actually is consistent. But then Rav Nahman has a switch. So how did that happen? Well, did Rabbi Yehudah Nasi, according to Rav Nahman, also switch the Beth Hillel's opinion so that it could be like that also? That's not as clear here, right? But certainly these clues that we use to decide what the halacha is are purposely embedded in the code of the Mishnah by the Yehudah Nasi. Okay, so this is fantastic and extremely important. Now we're going to question Rav Nahman's answer. Question of Nachman. So now you said that's talking about a chicken that was an egg factory and that therefore it's Mukseh. And that's why the egg is Mukseh. But why? Why do you have to bother with such a complicated case? Why bother talking about the egg? The machloket should just be about the chicken itself, right? Beth Shammai would say, yeah, you can eat the chicken because he doesn't think there's Mukseh. And Beth Hillel would say, don't eat the chicken because the chicken is there to make eggs and it's Mukseh, right? What does it add anything to talk about the eggs? The answer is, wants to talk about the eggs, that even though the egg is nolad, and you might think it's a new entity because now it was born, and maybe even Beth Hillel would say it's no good. No, so that's why it talks about the egg, to give us the extra chidush that even that is okay. That is okay. Wait a second, why not talk about the case of the chicken? And that will tell us the strength of Beth Hillel. and that even though it's not nolad, it's just a chicken, nevertheless, it's prohibited. And that would also be a chidush, and that would miss out on that chidush. And you'll tell me the power of leniency is preferable. Whenever someone gives you a kula, a leniency, they have to argue more strongly for it, right? Any rabbi anywhere could say prohibited, but you have to really know your stuff to be able to find why something should be permitted. And therefore, between giving us a chidush that Beth Hillel says no good, and that chicken is no good, and that a chidush that Beth Shammai says even the egg is good, you want to go by Beth Shammai that even nolad is permitted. That's the bigger chidush. But nevertheless, why not tell us both? Right? And you can give us both chidushim. Here's a rewriting of the Mishnah that would be better. Tanegol tamed legadel besim, he ubesata. Bet Shammai omrim teachel, Bet Hillel omrim lo teachel. All you have to do is add two words, right? If you have a chicken that's there to lay eggs, the chicken and the egg. Also, this is the Talmudic chicken and egg problem, right? Bet Shammai says both of them you can eat. Bet Hillel says neither of them you could eat. Okay, the Gemara doesn't usually say, add both, but in this case, it's so simple just to add two words, and you explain so much more. So if this was really the case, Rav Nahman, then the Mishnah should have been written in a clearer way, in a way that teaches even a greater chidush. And because the Mishnah is not written in that way, therefore we have a problem with Rav Nahman's explanation. And so this brings us to explanation number 2. Ela Amar Rabbah. You know what? I'm going to go back to the other side of the equation. Is talking about a chicken that's there to be eaten, and it's not a problem of Mukseh, right? There's no problem of Mukseh here. That would explain Bet Shammai. Now we have to explain Beth Hillel. What would be his problem? Oh, we're talking about a particular limited case. Ubiyom tov shechal liot achar haShabbat askinan. Mishum hachana, this egg that was laid, it's talking about a case that it was Yom Tov after Shabbat. Yom Tov is on Sunday, and Shabbat was the day before. And so the problem here is that of preparing. When Yom Tov follows Shabbat, you're not allowed to prepare food on Shabbat for Yom Tov. Now this egg, where was it, right? Where was it yesterday? It was inside the chicken. It was getting ready. It was getting prepared. And then it was born on Yom Tov. So if I eat it on Sunday, Yom Tov, I'm benefiting from something that was prepared on Saturday. And he also thinks that any egg born today was actually completed yesterday. So yesterday it was the process of completion, so I'm benefiting from Shabbat. Science does bear this out. Here's the development of chicken eggs when it's inside, and from the time that it leaves the ovary till the time that it actually drops is 24 hours, and that's when it grows its shell. In fact, it does complete the process in one day. And so if it's ready today, that means it became ready yesterday. And so that's the problem. It's just a preparation problem. And really, the Mishnah's prohibition of Bet Hillel saying no good only applies when Yom Tov is on Sunday. Any other day of the week, it will be okay. Now we're going to talk about the source of preparing. Why can't you prepare from one holiday to another? Regarding the man, it says on Friday you should prepare whatever you bring, right? Friday you go get double and preparation for Shabbat. So you're allowed to prepare on a regular Friday for Shabbat. Chol mechin la-Shabbat. V'chol mechin li-Yom Tov. Same thing before Yom Tov, you can prepare before. But ve'en Yom Tov mechin la-Shabbat, ve'en Shabbat mechina li-Yom Tov. Since it says a Friday, a regular Friday, that applies to a day of Chol, but not Yom Tov, cannot prepare from Yom Tov Shabbat, nor can you prepare from Shabbat to Yom Tov. That's the source of preparation in general. Here it's presented as if Rabbah is saying it. Elsewhere, this is quoted as a baraita. It's always curious when you have the same thing as a braita from Tanaim and in the name of an Amorah. Shita Mekubesed here says that really it's a braita, but since there's lots of other opinions about it, we're quoting it in the name of Rabbah because Rabbah agrees with this opinion. consistently. So therefore, we're quoting it also in his name. Amar le Abaye. So that's Rabba's Shita. Now Rabbi is going to challenge it. Oh, so according to you, if Yom Tov is on Wednesday, on Thursday, then you think the egg is permitted because, right, there was no Shabbat before, so there's no problem of hachana. He answers, Gezerah mishum Yom Tov achar Shabbat. I will still prohibit it as a gezerah. So therefore, when it's on Sunday, it'll be a problem mid-deoraita. Let's assume that hachana is deoraita, whatever. There's a pasuk here, right? Whereas if it's on Tuesday, Thursday, then it's just rabbanan. If I permit it on a Wednesday, then I'm going to come to permit it when it's on Sunday, and that would be a problem. Okay, how about Shabbat al matishtereh? What if an egg is laid on Shabbat? And so it was prepared on Friday, so it should be allowed, right? Are you going to say that? No, gezerah mishum Shabbat achad Yom Tov. Because sometimes it happens that there's a Shabbat after Yom Tov. If I permit it on a Shabbat, then one day Shabbat's going to be after Yom Tov, and I'm not going to realize that that should be prohibited, and therefore we make a gezerah. Okay, Abaye asks more. Mi gazrinan v'hatanya hashochetet hatanegolet umasaba besim gemurot mutarot leochlan be Yom Tov. Here's a braita that says I do shechita on a chicken on Yom Tov, and I find that there's eggs inside. There's an egg inside the chicken, and it's completed. I'm allowed to eat it on Yom Tov. So that everyone agrees, right? Because you can eat any part of the chicken. You can eat its heart, its liver, its legs. So I can eat the egg also. But if you think I should make a gezerah, then how come in this case you don't say, I better make a gezerah for the egg that I find inside the chicken because of a case of an egg that's laid on that day. And if I permit one, then I'm going to think that the one that's laid also is allowed. And then that one might be on a Sunday and so on. So how come if you're, once you're making all these gezerot, why don't you make a gezerah here? Finding an egg inside the chicken is unusual. We just said that it only takes 24 hours for the egg to be laid. So you have to get exactly in that time period in order to find such a thing. And that's a general rule. We're not going to make a gezerah for an unusual case. And that's why here. Whereas the other one, I mean, every so often, every few years, you're going to have a Shabbat that precedes a Yom Tov, and so that is actually more common. Interestingly, in my kids' school, just in the spring, one of the teachers is a shochet, and they brought a chicken to the school courtyard, and they did shechita, and they actually found an egg inside, and one of the kids ate it. So it's somewhat common, because it did just happen. Okay, so that was the second answer. Now we're going to get to the third answer. Rav Yosef Amar gezerah mishum perot hanoshrin. He also says a gezerah because if I permit an egg that's laid on Yom Tov to be eaten, then people will say, you know what that's like? That's like an apple that falls off a tree. Okay, you're not allowed to pick an apple, but if an apple that fell on its own, I'm not doing anything. So, you think that would be permitted. Now, actually, that's not permitted because if I allow that, if I allow an apple that fell off the tree, then I'm going to come to pluck it off the tree itself. So we're not going to allow an egg that fell from the chicken because that is similar to an apple that fell from the tree, and that is also not allowed. So we want to prohibit that whole concept, right? Where people get confused, they make their own comparisons, their own analogies, and so we want to prevent that. The apple that fell on its own is technically permitted midoraita. We just make a gezerah that if I permit the apples that fell, people are going to say, oh, look, I can eat apples. Even look, it just fell, but that's okay. So they're going to go and want to get more apples, and they're going to go up and pluck it, which is for sure not allowed. That's the oraita. So he kufa gezerah. Now you're making a double gezerah. Gezerah of the egg because it will look like the apple that fell. And the apple that fell is itself the gezerah that I might go and pluck the apple. So we don't make double gezerah, right? You have to make a fence around the Torah, one fence, but you don't make a fence for another fence. Our answer is kula hada gezerahi. Actually, it's all one gezerah. The rabbis sat together and they said, people are going to come to pluck apples. Therefore, anything like that, whether it be an apple that fell or an egg that fell, that's all considered one gezerah that we make at the same time. Okay, the last answer is very quick because it's very similar to the previous one, so let's just finish that. Rabbi Yitzchak amar, gezerah mishum mashkin shezavu. If you have grapes, and the grapes, some grape juice seeped out of it, that's prohibited, because then you're going to come to squeeze the grapes, which is for sure no good. So we're not going to allow the egg that fell, because if you allow the egg that fell, that was born, then people are going to say, oh, that's similar to juice that came out of the grape. And so that's a gezerah. Hold on. That whole seeping juice is itself only a d'Rabbanan, that if I allow that juice, and people are going to say, oh, juice that came out of a grape is allowed, I'm going to go squeeze it. So he gufa gezerah. So now you're making a double gezerah. You're saying an egg is like juice that seeped on its own, and juice that seeped on its own is only a gezerah before actually coming to squeeze it on purpose. The same answer, kula hada gezerah. Altogether, we said we have to make sure people don't squeeze fruit. Therefore, we're going to prohibit both seeping and an egg that was born on Yom Tov. And so now we have these 4 answers. Tomorrow, we're going to discuss why each person disagreed and didn't agree with the other response. But this is a wonderful introduction to the concept of Mukseh, and especially the similarities and differences between Shabbat and Yom Tov. Baruch Adonai L'olam. Amen ve'amen.